What were you doing at 33?
The biggest thing was fasting, and put myself on a protocol, retested 8 weeks later, and was able to rewind my biological clock by a full 2 years and 8 weeks.
Wow. Welcome back. Another episode that we have in this month's series on miscarriage and infertility is with a fabulous doctor who specializes in just that. I think she said she was trained in primary care. She's trained in primary care. So if you're like not into all the alternative medicines, then don't worry. She's fully trained doctor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's, we're just talking about this. That's a piece to the puzzle. And I think you need to see the entire picture as opposed to just one snapshot of it. She is the medical director of Gentera's Southern California location. And she is a fertility specialist. She will look at blood work. She will look at stool samples. She will look at urine analysis. She's going to look at a whole host of things, but specifically what you are putting in your body, your environment, what's going on up here in your head, what is going on around you, and then also what you've been exposed to throughout your entire life and potentially your mother's life, your grandmother's life, and so on.
Nuts. There's so much
generational trauma. I know,
Yeah.
absolutely. And again, it's just another piece to the puzzle of figuring out what you can do to not only increase your chances of getting pregnant, but also having a successful pregnancy.
I was just going to say, on our Labor Day episode, if you listen to that, Kacie had talked about the Clockwize test that she did that told a little bit about her biological clock versus her actual chronological clock of her being 33 years old and what the results were from that. So she goes into that test, and there is a special promo code to that test. And I also learning so much more about it from Dr. Z today. Like, I'm not trying to conceive at the moment, but it would be really great to know even just more about my health. So I might even do it.
The thing that is startling and troubling and paralyzing, for lack of a better word, is how much we don't know about our health. I feel like it's like the ocean. You know, it's like 5% of the ocean has been explored. It's like, well, what do we really know unless there is a surface problem about the inner workings of our bodies? You don't go looking normally. You just fix something that's going on.
I think, very reactive instead of proactive. I think the analogy of the ocean is so good because there's just so much, like every system in our body is so complex. Think about how many doctors there have to be to make it. I wonder, is there a number on that? Like how many doctors there is specifically to make up the entire body? You think about
how many doctors do you have to have?
Dentists are another. Neurologists are one. Like ortho is another. Like how many are there dedicated to one body?
And then you're not even talking about like the spiritual aspect. And how many, I know, we're getting woo-woo with it. I know. All right, but without further ado, Dr. Z.
Here she is.
Dr. Katherine Zagone, who I have found through my travels and who has helped me immensely in my life. You've helped so many other women across the country, globally. Thank you so much for joining us, first of all.
Thank you for having me, ladies. I'm so excited to be here.
I want you to just give us a blanket overview of what your plan of attack is in treating a woman who comes to you with infertility or just wants to get pregnant.
Yeah. So definitely a slightly different protocol, whether somebody's already struggling or whether they're really more just preparing. And I definitely approach fertility from a different perspective than most conventional doctors, for sure. So I'm trained as a naturopathic doctor, which means I'm a primary care doc, but specializing in natural medicine. So my primary goal is to figure out, one, what is the root cause? So why is someone not getting pregnant? Why is the couple not getting pregnant? Because there's two halves to that equation. And then how can we cultivate health in the body? So one of the things I've discovered over both in my training, but also in 10 years of being in practice, is that fertility is a byproduct of health. And so the first thing we do is we want to cultivate health in the body. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but I break it down into everything we eat, drink, breathe, touch, think, and feel. And I also do quite a bit of diagnostic testing. So oftentimes in the infertility world, which is more of the conventional world, you have to try for a year before a doctor will run any tests to see what's going on.
And that's the issue when women are trying at older and older ages in this generation.
Yes. And as you get older, they break it. They're like, okay, well, if you're over 35, you can try for 6 months. And if you don't get pregnant,
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So prevention first. But really what it comes back to is possibility and planning ahead, because everything that mom and dad eat, drink, breathe, touch, think, and feel 3 months before conception, but ultimately for years before they bring that baby in, is setting that child up. It's not just, can we get pregnant? Can we get pregnant easily? That is a huge part of this, because infertility rates are on the rise. Part of it is that women are waiting longer to conceive, but another big part of it is toxin exposure and stress. Mm-hmm. But it's also, there's an area of science called epigenetics, and this is how our genes are expressed. And what we know is that mom and dad not only pass down their genes, which we can't change the genes, but they also pass down the epigenetics, or how those genes are expressed, which genes are turned on, which genes are turned off. And now we know we actually have some control over that. So we can turn the good genes up and on, and we can turn the bad genes down and off. And a lot of that gets passed down to our babies. And a big chunk of that happens in the 3 months before conception, because the egg and the sperm take 3 months from when they start developing in the ovary and in the testes till when they're actually released to meet for conception. So a portion of my practice is couples who want to come in and create the healthiest baby possible, super babies, and who spend anywhere from 6 months to a year preparing their bodies, their hearts, their minds, their homes, in order to bring these babies in.
I don't want to freak anybody out, but like the 3 months before, you told me that our first time speaking, the 3 months before you conceive are the most important. You do talk about years before, and then we're learning, I don't know why, but all of a sudden this is like a common thing that I'm seeing all over social media, is that your eggs, the eggs that are in my body and Gianna's body and your body and people listening, were in our grandmother's
I always
body.
think that's fascinating.
So that is, and they talk about generational trauma, and they talk about all these things that you carry with you. What do the guys bring to the table? No, I'm teasing. But like this is a real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then not to scare anyone, but so my grandmother smoked when she was pregnant with my mom. I'm sure.
Yeah,
and the whole generation did. Yeah.
And I always wonder, is that why? Like, we know moms who smoked, those female babies have a higher risk of PCOS later in life. So are a lot of the health issues that we are seeing in our generation a result of what our grandmothers did when they were pregnant with our mothers? And I think there is some component of that, but we also know that the body is intelligent. Like, we have detox mechanisms, we have mechanisms built in to help reset these epigenetics. So we are not destined to suffer from our lineage, whether it's the trauma or the toxins or whatever it is. I think our generation is also the one that's realizing that there is so much healing that we can do for ourselves, and that we can change the lineage now and moving forward.
You said you're seeing a higher rate of infertility, and I always wonder this, like, is that the case, or is it just that we're fostering an environment where people feel more comfortable talking about it now, and people weren't sharing that before and basically sitting with it in silence? And I think the same thing about miscarriage, because I have a plethora of friends, including myself, who have had miscarriage. And I, talk to my mom about it. And she's like, my God, what is it? This was never the case back in my day. And I'm like, but was it? Or were people just not talking about it? Or also the fact that we have these early detection tests that women are testing much sooner and thinking, I'm pregnant earlier than a woman may have before, and may have completely missed the miscarriage, basically.
I think it's a combination. So I think there is a lot more awareness, a lot more conversation about it, which I think is a fantastic thing, because it can be such a hard thing to go through, especially alone, without having support, whether that's friends or community.
And feeling shame, like feeling like you're the problem.
Like you're the problem, 100%, which I love how you said in the beginning too, like, this is a two-part process. This is the woman and the man, but everybody just wants to go right to, oh, something must be wrong with her, or she's infertile. And I actually have a friend a male who is experiencing male infertility, and he has been so outspoken about it. And I applaud him a million times for it, because
but here's the thing, Gianna, that makes me irate. And Dr. Z, maybe you can talk about this more because you're in the field. Why is there not a test?
Yeah.
We are tested. We are poked and prodded from the time we come out of the womb. What is it? Is it a funding thing? Is it an insurance doesn't coverage thing? Is it a money thing where when you're 18 years old or when you get a pap smear, they're like, okay, we're going to check for eggs?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of testing that's being developed, and I'm definitely working in that field of developing testing. And I can talk about the test I've created and what we've done for fertility.
I've already done that one. I can't wait for you to tell
I know
what's really there. We have something really exciting with that too. So that's coming up.
And there's first I want to just acknowledge that there are a lot of good scientists working in this field right now. And a lot of good female scientists as well. Like there's the Buck Institute has a Center for Reproductive Longevity. Now, what's interesting is they are focusing more on like menopause, which everything is connected. Obviously, the later you can push menopause, the longer you're going to be fertile in most cases. And there is a company that's actually working on doing sperm testing for things like methylation, which we'll talk about when we talk about the Clockwize test. And so there is good research being done, and there's actually some good government funding that's out there that
because more people would freeze their eggs earlier.
Well, and I think there's an education component that needs to happen, because what's so crazy to me, like I'm in the field, so I get it. I've been feeling the biological clock ticking. Like I know that it's a thing, but I have a lot of women who come to me at 40 and don't even realize that, like, oh, you mean I might have trouble? Which on one hand is great, because it's like, you don't want to be sending your cells the message that you're going to have trouble. But on the other hand, if they haven't been living a healthy lifestyle for 10 years, they're going to have trouble.
Yeah.
So, and that comes down to biological age, not chronological age. Like I've had 40-year-old women who get pregnant on accident, and I've had 40-year-old women who go through years and years and years of struggle. And there's a lot of factors.
That's what I think is so complex about this, that it really depends on the individual person. There's no one hat. There's no one hat. There's no such thing as being like, oh, what did you do to get pregnant? Great. I'll try that. And I'm pregnant now.
Well, there are people that like use their husband's toothbrush and get pregnant.
Right. Like, no. And that's
like that happened to me the first time. And then you feel the guilt for that, so there are totally different hats.
Yeah. Kacie and Eric locked eyes from across the room at her wedding, and she was pregnant. But I've always said, I wish there was a test, and tell me if this is something that exists or something that your Clockwize test can help with, that can tell you how, like, if it's going to take you a little bit of time to get pregnant, because how there are women where they get pregnant right away, or it may take them a year, or you actually need this type of vitamin, or you need this type of hormone, or whatever.
But then you're on Instagram and you see everyone else having babies, and you're like, I can't wait. There are so many pressures, not only your body, but there are so many pressures.
Yeah. Or I have people that have said, like, if I knew it was going to take this long, I would have started sooner. Or if I knew it was going to be this quick, I would have waited another year. I thought it was going to take a year to get pregnant. And this is why I started. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's two things I think that we can speak about on this specifically. So what you're asking about is called time to pregnancy, or TTP, or time to conception. TTC can also mean trying to conceive. So, so time to pregnancy, time to conception. And it's in the, let's say, the IVF world, they use a few markers that are not great markers for predicting success. We don't have a marker yet for predicting how long it's going to take when you're trying naturally. The sperm company that I spoke about, actually, they are working on that on the sperm side of things, which is super interesting. And for Clockwize, that's actually what we're working toward in the future. So our test.
Well, briefly tell everyone what Clockwize is.
So Clockwize, we make an at-home test that tests your biological age, which is more important for your fertility than your chronological age. They're different. This is why you can have a 40-year-old woman who gets pregnant on accident and a 40-year-old woman who struggles for years and years and years. And that ultimately comes down to your health, the health of your cells. The healthier you are, the younger your biological age. And in a lot of cases, the easier it is to get pregnant, and the better results you get if you do egg freezing or IVF. We also test pace of aging, and we can go through what these different markers are. And then we also do a fertility toxin panel called ClockTox that looks at some of the top fertility toxins that we know when these things are in your system, it takes longer to conceive naturally.
Spoiler alert, I was older. My biological age is older. I'm a 30, almost 36-year-old, 33-year-old, and I tested positives for these toxins.
However, what I'll say about you, Kacie, so yes, your biological age came back older, but biological age is a measure of your entire life. So if you had some really fun college years,
or some all over myself.
or childhood trauma or something that accelerated that biological clock a decade ago, that's going to be taken into account in this biological age. But your pace of aging, which is what you're doing right now, came back actually fantastic. Like one of the best I've seen. So you came back at 0.7. 1.0 means you're aging at the exact rate as time, which is fine.
That's amazing. Right.
But you came back at 0.7, which means you're aging much slower than time, which tells me that everything that you're doing is right on, is fantastic. And there's still going to be some areas for tweaking. And then the toxin panel, there was a lot you didn't come back with, which is great. You did come back with BPF, and you probably read this in the report, so again, not to scare you, but prenatal exposure to BPF, and BPF is what they put into plastics when it says BPA free.
This is what I was telling Gianna about. So this is, as the queen of no plastics, I came back for plastics. So
yep,
that's the scary part.
Yep. So when there was prenatal exposure to BPF, children at 7 years old, more boys specifically, so boys at 7 years old, because that was the time point they chose to test at, had statistically significant decreased cognitive function than mothers who had no BPF exposure.
I mean, come on. I have a 1-year-old boy. Like, you know what I like? So this is why, and then Dr. Z will formulate a plan to attack these things. So tell people what else would be a plan to attack these issues. You know, if their rate of age was older, or if their biological age was older.
Can I ask a question real quick before we get into the plan? Because I know that's going to be really important. But you said it's almost like you hear this saying of like, oh, it took years off my life, which seems like is actually true here, because it's like technically changing your biological year. So
changing your composition.
Yeah. So it's like people make a joke like, oh yeah, college took years off my life, but like, oh, it probably really did. I'm sitting here scratching my head being like, college and my early 20s.
How many beers did I have?
I might be clocking out. Am I like a 52-year-old woman? Because they were some intense but very fun times. But I wonder how COVID affected this, because I read something yesterday about how like our generation is struggling to even understand that we are the age that we are because we like lost that period of time. That like, I do feel, I was 29 years old. No, I was 30 years old going into COVID. And I do sometimes feel like I'm only 31 or 32, but I'm 34. And it's because I lost 2 years of COVID. So is that something that you're seeing, or is that maybe not have been studied just yet, of how that could be affecting someone's biological clock?
Well, there's two pieces to speak on specifically with COVID. One, the thing that we know accelerates the biological age and the biological clock the fastest is stress. Now, we actually have data. Now, the other component of that is the virus itself.
Yes.
So there is published research on what happens to the biological age when you get COVID. And what's interesting is that it actually depended on how old you were when you got COVID. So, and it's been a year or so since I've looked at this specific paper, but I believe that it was people under 40, after they recovered from COVID, their biological clock actually got a little bit younger.
What?
Wow. Does the severity of the symptoms affect that?
I don't believe they tracked that.
Okay.
Wait, what's the thought process behind that? How did it reverse aging?
I have to go back to this paper and look at it because it was super interesting when it came out, and I haven't looked at it since because I didn't
do the doctor thing. Do the doctor thing.
Yeah, I wasn't sure we were going to be talking about COVID today, but
no, that's okay. Wow.
So there's some potential mechanisms. So one is that when you're really sick, you aren't really eating anything, and we know that fasting is a great way to rewind the biological clock. You go into what's called autophagy. Your immune system goes in and like eats up all the old bad cells, and then you come out healthier and younger.
Wow. Is there any research yet with COVID and any effect on conceiving or pregnancy or immunity for babies born? If the mother, I had COVID twice while I was pregnant.
You know what? I haven't seen anything recently on like passing down natural immunity.
Yeah.
But as it is a virus, and when mom does have antibodies and is immune, what we've seen in every other virus is that immunity is passed down through the placenta and through breast milk. And so I would assume it to be the same. I haven't looked at a specific paper on that yet.
That's so interesting. And just so the audience is clear, we're not out here promoting to go get COVID.
No. Don't go
in the skincare aisle now. Reverse your aging with COVID injection shots.
Who is coughing in CVS and like lick the doorknob that they touch. No, but I just want to, in wrapping up Clockwise, to get back on track of infertility awareness, I want to say if someone's thinking about it and they're like, "Wow, that's really interesting. I'd love to do that." Take us through really like nuts and bolts, why it's important, what the aftercare is, and how much it costs. And then we do have a little cherry on top of that.
Yes. So it's called the Fertility Wise test. You can get it on clockwize.com. You get a beautiful box shipped to your home. It was beautiful, right, Kacie?
It's beautiful and it's easy. Like it's very easy. It's kind of like
it's just a finger prick, right?
It's like finger painting. You kind of get to finger paint a little bit. You get a freaky way.
You do a quick little finger prick. You drop your drops of blood into a little circle, your finger painting. You literally put it in an envelope and drop it in the mail. And it takes, maybe a week to get to the lab. The lab takes a couple of weeks to process. So it isn't a fast test. This isn't something like if you're doing IVF next week that you're going to have your results in time.
Right.
Although
it was like a month. It wasn't too long.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely designed for like planning ahead. And then you get a beautiful report that gives you your biological age, your pace of aging, your toxin report, your clock tox panel. And then you also get like 20 pages of what I call our FAST framework, which is all the things that rewind the biological clock. Mm-hmm. So that's food, fasting, fitness, associated conditions, sleep, stress, supplementation, toxins, and trauma. And a paragraph or more under each of those sections of something you can start doing today to start rewinding that biological clock.
Price for that, and there's a promo code.
Yes. So it's $4.99. And with your Mother Up promo code, literally just type in Mother Up into the all caps, probably.
One word.
Yeah, one word, all caps, into the code when you check out, and you'll get $49 off.
And we're not making anything. We are giving total discount for all of the listeners. So I think it's really important.
So important for everyone.
Information is power. And I think it's another thing that's out and it's cutting edge and it will help you in your journey. So going back to the journey, going back to infertility, what is one of the biggest issues that you're seeing, or like the biggest questions that you're seeing?
So most of the patients that I see come to me with unexplained infertility.
Yeah.
So there are some issues where it's quite easy to diagnose. So like one of the first steps in like an infertility workup in the conventional world, which is a great early step, is to do like some imaging. So they either do saline or some dye to make sure your fallopian tubes are open, to check structural issues. Because if it's something like that, then there's some clear next steps. But most of the women who struggle, they either tell them it's advanced, you're old, or we just don't know. Right. And oftentimes what I see is that there's not really a thorough enough workup. And so sometimes it's thyroid, sometimes it's nutrient deficiencies, sometimes it's, and I'm going to speak to this, sometimes it is stress, but there's a very physiological mechanism for how that works. So our body is either making stress hormones or it's making sex hormones. So if we're in the stress bucket too often, we're not making good sex hormones, and we need those sex hormones to make a baby. And this comes back to some of our primitive mechanisms of it takes a lot of energy as a human to create another human. 9 months, lots of nutrients, lots of calories, lots of resources, lots of sleep, lots of love, lots of everything. So if there's anything in your body that thinks that offspring is not going to survive outside the body, it's going to either stop ovulation, which we see in some conditions, or if you don't, or there's going to be compensatory mechanisms. Your body is going to change its hormones, change sometimes even like the neurological system, to make sure you're not using a ton of resources if it doesn't think that baby's going to survive. So the most kind of like an example would be like for not a lot of women, but for some women, if they don't have enough body fat or body weight, it's hard to get pregnant. And this is like an easy example to understand, because if the body doesn't think there's enough food out there, it's not going to make another human.
Right.
But also if the body thinks that there's tigers running around and you're constantly running from a tiger, whether it's your boss or your, whoever, you're also not going to make another human, because humanity, biology is like, no, we don't want that baby to get eaten by tigers.
Right.
So it sounds silly, but this is kind of what's happening in our bodies.
And just so I understand fully, so there was like a alphabetical list of things that you had mentioned, the food, trauma, all these different things. I assume that varies person by person in like which thing is affecting the infertility. Is that the case?
Yes. So there are oftentimes what I see when I'm like assessing a couple is usually there's room for improvement in a few areas, and there's like one big area that's kind of like the main thing.
Got it. Okay.
Is there something that you see more so in couples that maybe, and I'm not saying anything about conventional medicine, but maybe something that conventional medicine or fertility doctors who say, give it a year, don't see or overlook or don't run that test for?
I mean, I'm checking like 46 micronutrient levels. We're looking at gut health and microbiome. We're looking at, I've had some really interesting like learnings with patients because I'll find things like H. pylori, which is a stomach infection that I find in maybe like 50% of my patients.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And whether you have symptoms or not, but interestingly, so I'm like, oh, does this have a connection to fertility? Because I've had a few cases where I'm like, that's the thing that we treat. We just treat the gut and they get pregnant. And it's like, is there a connection between H. pylori? And actually I found and so then I like go into the research and it's like really fun for me to play detective. And I'm like, oh, there's a study out of Japan that men with H. pylori infections had poorer semen parameters and whatnot. So I'm learning so much with each couple as I'm like, we know the foundations of health. And so I treat as a naturopathic doctor, like we create health in the body, whether that's killing off an infection, supporting the immune system, supporting the parasympathetic nervous system to help make healthy hormones. So, I mean, compared to a conventional doc, I'm running a lot of different tests and a lot more tests. And we're also talking about the mind-body component a lot more. Like that's a piece that I think is completely left out of the conventional world in most cases. Although what's interesting is I came to the mind-body medicine just from my own healing process and my own like seeing what was working with people. And I'm very spiritual and connected and it mattered to me. And so I would like see if it worked with patients and it did. However, there's also a doctor out of Harvard who was doing research on like hypnotherapy for fertility. And guess what?
Wow.
They got better results.
Wow.
No way.
Yeah.
So, okay, how about this? How about if someone's listening and they're like, I want to try all of this. Like maybe they live in Boston or they live in Florida or they live in Texas and they're like, okay, I can't see Dr. Z. How do they find a doctor, a natural doctor, or how do they find a hypnosis, or is it called a hypnosis? What's it called?
Hypnotherapist.
Yeah, hypnotherapist. There we go. Okay. There we go. How do we find that specifically for fertility?
So on the like functional medicine, so functional medicine and naturopathic medicine are very similar. We're taking a systems approach, functional testing, looking at the whole body, looking at systems. Functional
Wait,
may or may
ask
not.
that again because I sounded like an idiot. Okay. So what am I saying? How do I find a functional medicine doctor?
Or you could say, how do we find like the right practitioner?
Okay. If someone is listening to this and they're like, that is for me, I want to try all of these alternative methods, how do they find a practitioner in both of those areas?
So on the functional side of things, so either naturopathic physicians or like functional medicine doctors, and they're very similar systems approach, diagnostic testing, prevention. For the naturopathic doctor side of things, you can go to naturopathic.org and you can click find a doc and you can type in your zip code. We're not licensed in every state, although there are naturopathic doctors in every state. It just, their scope may be a little bit different. I can write prescriptions here. Can't get licensed in Illinois or New Jersey, which is where I'm going to New Jersey. So we'll figure it out. But, and then there's also the IFM, the Institute for Functional Medicine. So this is typically more conventional practitioners who moved into the more functional world. And they also have like a find a practitioner button on their website as well. And then on the mind body side of things, I think there's a lot of practitioners out there. I think there's a lot of coaches. There's a lot of hypnotherapists. And so I would probably ask for like a referral from somebody, who's worked with somebody. And on that side of things, the thing that matters to me the most is that you connect with that person, you resonate with that person, you trust that person, because that creates what's called the therapeutic relationship, and then everything works better. Go ahead.
In terms of the mind-body aspect, what's something that you tell your patients and can tell our audience listening today if they are internalizing this so hard and are really, talking down to themselves and blaming themselves for what they're going through? What message can you share with them?
2 components. The first is give yourself the space to fully feel your feelings.
Yes. Feel it to heal it. We talked about that on the other episodes. Yes.
But also don't direct that feeling toward as negativity towards yourself, but let yourself have the moment or however much time you need to process the despair, to process the disappointment, whatever's moving through. Let yourself feel it. It's okay. It's going to feel like shit. And if you fight it, if you hold, you're using a lot of energy to not feel that thing. And so allowing yourself to fully express actually frees up a lot of life force in the body. And life force is good for fertility. So the first step is feel it. The second step is, I would say get support is probably the third step, but the second step is create a practice for yourself. And that can be whatever you feel called, but trust yourself. If that's just breathing and coming back to center for 10 minutes a day, which I mean,
a yoga or meditation, whatever works for the person.
Choosing something, but then also practicing awareness of those thoughts. So when you notice those thoughts coming in, consciously choosing a different thought, which for a lot of us, it's like, oh, I can do that. I remember the moment I was like, you mean I don't have to believe my thoughts? Like what? So awareness. So notice what you're saying to yourself and consciously choose a different story, a different line, a different mantra. But if you don't do the first part, and if you don't allow yourself to fully heal and feel through the heavier emotions, you're basically, and a woman who I've studied with, an amazing coach, likes to say, you're just putting perfume on a poo pie. So,
oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah, that's true.
Phthalate filled perfume on a poo pie.
Yeah. Kacie loves phthalates.
Clearly, I do. I'm full of them, despite my best efforts.
What about for women who are able to get pregnant, but they can't keep the baby and they keep having miscarriages? Is that something that you find that your medicine or this Clockwize test is able to help with?
Yes. So, there's kind of like an order of operations of most likely causes. So, the first thing I definitely check is progesterone and thyroid. So if progesterone isn't high enough, progesterone is what stabilizes that uterine lining and is necessary to maintain that pregnancy. So that's the first thing I check. And then the second thing would be thyroid, especially antibodies for a condition called Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition. Because we know women with those antibodies have higher rates of miscarriage because there's this autoimmune process. And so the body is attacking itself and sometimes attacking your baby potentially. And so in that case, we would need to address the Hashimoto's and potentially work on that autoimmune piece. Other things though, is if it is more of a genetic quality issue, if that embryo is just not viable, then we're looking at both egg quality, but also sperm quality. And I think one of the most under-tested, under-investigated issues is the quality of the DNA in that sperm. And that can be tested through what's called DNA fragmentation, where they actually look at the health of the DNA. So even if they're the right shape and they can swim and their tails work and there's the right amount of them, if that DNA inside has been damaged by nutrient deficiencies, toxin exposures, laptop on your lap, that, electronic toxins, then that, unfortunately, when we're not finding something in mama to be, that could be why she keeps losing.
Fault.
Yeah, it's his fault.
Well, is this what could be affecting what they say the grade of the embryo? I've heard a lot of friends that do IVF talk about we got a ton of eggs and sperm and embryo and it's all testing right until we get to the embryo and the grade of the embryo is not.
Is that the percentage that they give it? The out of 100%? Is that what you're talking about, Gianna?
No, they're like little like letters, like A, B, or C of the grading of the embryo.
Because I know there's like a viability. Like if you have 6 embryos, they're like ranked in order of success rate, potential success rate.
Yeah. So the grading does come down to like the genetic health, the genetic material.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how that you may not be able to answer this, but if it is a sperm quality issue, how long is it going to take to increase that quality? Is there an answer to that or no?
If we address the cause, about 3 to 4 months.
Oh.
Because they're constantly making new sperm.
Right.
So get the laptop off the lap, get the cell phone out of the pocket, get metabolic health. I mean, the health of that sperm is 50% of the DNA and 50% of the epigenetics. Now, mom is... Yeah. Yes.
Seriously. Stop.
What are some things that you've heard of that you're like, okay, there are some weird things that affect sperm health or even egg health, but that's not one of them. Everybody, please stop worrying about that.
Oh, yeah. Myth bust.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay.
Or you can tell us one thing that's so surprising that people are like, what?
Yeah.
Like, that is affecting me?
Okay. So here's a thing that is very surprising that most people do every single day and never realize that it's affecting their fertility on both the male and female side of things. So do both of you go out and get a Starbucks like to go cup ever?
Sure do.
And do you have a plastic lid on that cup?
Sure does.
Okay, so do you drink coffee or do you drink tea?
Coffee.
Hot coffee. And then reheat it in the microwave.
I'm an iced girl.
Okay, well, so coffee is acidic. Acidity leaches plastic. Heat leaches plastic. So when you're drinking a hot coffee in a plastic lined paper cup with a plastic lid, you are leaching all sorts of plastic, phthalates, BPA, all sorts of chemicals into that, and you're basically drinking chemical soup. And so that's that. It's the things we do every day that make the biggest difference, not like a one-time exposure,
right?
Unless it's really big and really bad. But so that's the thing that I think is most surprising to people, that they're like, oh, this one thing that I do every single day that I really love doing,
right,
could be destroying my fertility on both the male and female side.
There's nothing different than making coffee at home and putting it in a to-go cup.
Yeah, just make sure it's like ceramic or metal or like, not plastic, paper. Not paper.
Yes. Well, that was another study that just came out, that paper straws and paper products in general are also an issue.
Yeah, what's crazy is we're finding BPA in everything. We're finding it in like athletic wear.
Can we stop with the paper straws? I can't do that anymore.
At this point, I mean, you're just like, give me the plastic back. No,
I'm
but really,
sorry, I can't.
I literally carry around either a glass or metal straw at all times. I have a rose gold one that sits in my purse.
That's amazing.
Cute.
Yeah.
But those are the phthalates that are affecting not only us, but our future children.
100%.
And what does that do? If you're like, okay, whatever, like, I don't care. Like, I need my coffee and that's how I bring it to work, and I don't want to clean a cup and whatever. So what? I have plastics in me. What is the repercussion of that?
Increased miscarriage rate, increased time to conception, decreased success with egg freezing and IVF, potentially increased risk of your child having asthma, allergies, eczema, obesity, diabetes. Those are the risks.
I have like several people I'm calling immediately after this interview and telling them they need to stop. I like can think of people that I know that do this religiously every day.
I'm like, but if you go back to, sorry, go ahead.
So there was a study that recently came out that I haven't had time to dive into like more than just the abstract yet, but it was about how babies who were fed with plastic bottles had poorer cholesterol markers than babies who were breastfed. Now, so it's like our children are also being exposed to this. So there's some of our own exposure, but then there's also going to be their own exposure, which we want to minimize as much as possible as well. But when we see like skyrocketing rates of like diabetes, obesity, it is the food supply, but it's also the plastic in the food supply, and it's what we're breathing and touching and putting on our skin and all of it.
Well, my son, I mean, I breastfed, well, I pumped for a few months, and then I went to formula, which is sitting in a plastic bottle for God knows how long. I was using glass baby bottles, but I mean, at that point, the damage is done. It's already in the formula, leached into the formula at that point. In terms of, I asked you this question. items and food products in plastic, where do you draw the line? Because you had told me if it's dry in plastic, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we can't like drive ourselves insane trying to eliminate every little itty bitty thing. So the things that are the worst are anything acidic and anything hot. So like tomato sauce, like if it's in like tomato sauce is acidic. So choose that in a glass jar versus in a can that could be lined with BPA or BPF or BPS.
So aluminum and metal is an issue too in some senses, because there could be lead, you could be getting heavy metals.
You could be getting heavy metals, and the cans are often lined with some sort of plasticizer as well. So it's rough. But like if you're getting like almonds and they're in a plastic bag and they're like like I buy almonds in a plastic bag, okay? Like it's not the end of the world. Definitely. So no heating plastic. I wouldn't, like if you are using plastic for food storage of any sort, do not put hot food in it at all. Definitely don't reheat it. So dry is less of an issue. Cold is typically less of an issue, or room temperature. And then things that are not like chemically active. So like I said, like the tomato sauce is like a little more reactive. It's acidic. It can leach a little bit more. That's what I got for you right now.
I mean, even types of butter I have seen have forever chemicals from the wrappers that they're in.
Yeah. Yeah. So we could go on forever about toxins, but I want to remind us that the body is resilient and that especially when we have the right nutrients, the body can get rid of these things and can reset those epigenetics as well. So the first step is always avoidance. Like we want to stop it coming in, and then we also want to support it coming out of the body. But two of the nutrients, and we list this in the Fertility-Wise report, that have been shown to support kind of like counteracting the damage of a lot of these toxins. The first is folate, which, prenatal wise is super important. And then the second is EGCG, which is a green tea extract. So if you drink green tea, not out of a plastic cup, and
not out of a tea bag.
Yeah.
Those have plastics too.
Yep, exactly. Then you are counteracting damage from things that we're exposed to every single day. Because of all my couples, no one has ever gotten down to zero toxins. And that's not a realistic expectation.
Right.
I have women, believe me, I have women who are like, we're not getting pregnant until every single thing is out of my body. It's not going to happen.
Right. Right.
And so our job is to do the best we can, because if you have too much, the stress is going to counteract the benefit of having the toxins out of the body, to be quite honest. So we do the best we can.
Right.
We make sure we're nourished. We make sure our routes of elimination are open so the body can get these things out. We make sure our liver is working well. We're pooping every day. We're sweating. We're drinking plenty of water. We're getting good sources of folate. My favorite is organ meats, grass-fed beef liver, whether it's like, I won't actually eat it. My sister tried making it for me one time. It did not go well. It does come in capsules. There are also things like, my favorite seasoning blend is Pluck, and they have grass-fed organs, dehydrated, ground up, and mixed with herbs and spices. So you taste like you're eating herbs and spices. You don't taste, it tastes like you are eating herbs and spices. But you are getting some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet into your body in that moment.
I appreciate you saying what you said just a few minutes ago, because I really don't want the audience, I don't want this to cause more stress for them, right? No. Which is bad in itself. And then, they're worrying about, oh my God, now I have to basically change my entire practice of life, of plastics and coffee and this and that, and where I put my laptop and what my husband does. It's all so overwhelming. And the point that we're trying to make here is not that you're doing everything wrong, but basically like, there are things that we can look at and say, let's take them out of your life. Let's subtract that and see if we can make a difference in your fertility. So to clarify again, the Clockwize test can basically help a person fine tune where of everything that we've talked about today, they need to focus.
So the Clockwize test is going to give, it's not going to give you like, you specifically need to start with fasting. It's going to give you where you are right now. So your biological age in this moment, your aging speedometer in this moment. So that's going to tell you Okay, so like for most of our women and most of our men actually come back, biological age is older, pace of aging is younger. It is less than 1, like just like Kacie.
Mm-hmm.
She's like
Slow.
typical case. Which tells you that what you're doing right now is working for your cellular health, for your biological age. You would just need to be doing it longer to see the years fall off the clock on that number above. So it gives you an idea of like, okay, if I'm at 1.0 right now, okay, I'm probably doing some good things, but there's a lot more in these 20 pages that I could be doing to age even slower. Or we have had people come back at like 1.2, 1.3. So what you're doing in that moment is not working for you.
Mm-hmm.
What is your stress level? Are you even sleeping? What, like these are the people that need a lifestyle overhaul.
I hear women screaming like, no, I have children. I'm not sleeping.
Yeah. But when you do these things, it works. Like when we were first creating this test, so I was 33 at the time. And, I've been doing at that point, I hadn't been in practice 10 years yet, but, I'd been seeing patients for like 7-ish years and, obviously had seen some pretty incredible success stories of women who, like, for example, this couple came to me, she was 42. She had failed round of IVF at 36, failed round of IVF at 40.
Wow.
Came to me at 42. And you would think, 42 to 36, like, how am I going to get any better results for this couple? And, they ended up getting 9 grade A embryos.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, so I know it's more about health than it is about age, but I take the test myself thinking I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm doing everything right. And I came back 4 years older than I was.
Wow.
And had a whole mental breakdown around it.
You freaked out.
And I'm mid-30s, single in LA, wanting babies. And I'm like, this is a fertility death sentence. And so then I'm like, I now need to solve this first for myself and then for everybody else. And put myself on a protocol, retested 8 weeks later, and was able to rewind my biological clock by a full 2 years and 8 weeks.
Wow.
And then over the next year, so it was like a year and a quarter of this part of the journey. So on my 35th birthday, I came back at 31 3/4. So I went from 4 years older.
What were you doing at 33? And what did you change in those 8 weeks that decreased your biological age by 2 years?
The biggest thing was fasting. It was the thing I was most resistant to. It was the thing I was like, this is terrible for fertility, like no fasting. There was also something in me that was like, oh, I actually have some like emotional reliance on food that I was not willing to look at up until that point. And then that was the thing that was like, okay, now I need to heal inside. And so the fasting was the biggest difference that I made in that first 8 weeks. And I would also just caveat, fasting is not appropriate if you are actively trying to conceive. I only recommend it if you've got 3 months or more before opening that conception window.
And there are so many types of fasting. Is that specific to a person, or how long did you fast?
So I actually used the Prolon fasting mimicking diet, and I did it twice in 2 months. So I did it. It's 5 days.
You're stronger than me. I made it to day 3. Gianna, do you know this?
No.
Okay. The food's great.
Yeah. It's basically a big box with 5 little boxes, and you just eat what's in that box for that day.
What's in that? Like a cherry and some almonds?
Close. Yeah. You get like a dehydrated vegetable soup and like a little bar, a nut bar, and some olives and another soup and some tea. And it's the nutrients to keep you going, but it's the right ratios of and levels of everything so that your body thinks it goes into what's called autophagy, which is the goal of fasting, which is where your body goes in and eats up all the old bad cells. So I like to say it's like 80% of the benefit of doing a water fast with only 20% of the suffering. So water fasts are rough and hard, and I don't recommend them for everybody. They're very effective if you do them. But Prolon I have found to be both like research-wise shown to be very effective for rewinding the biological clock. And then in our both the Clockwize population community and in my practice, also very effective. So the fasting was the thing that I was most resistant to, and it was the thing that made the biggest difference for me.
So I, in this moment, am not trying to conceive, but could this Clockwize test be good for me just to learn more about my body and to be able to say, hey, here's some things that I might need to eliminate to live a healthier life?
100%. I mean, fertility is a byproduct of health. So if you want health, this is a great test to start with. And I mean, I think we all want like longevity and anti-aging. So that's that's the goal across the board, and we can definitely help you with that.
Yeah,
and even
I'd be
if you
so
don't want
interested
anti-aging, you just want to be healthy. And here's the thing: so if someone's like, okay, you know what, this is adding up. I don't have this budget. I can't buy Clockwize. I can't also buy this Prolon for a few $100s. Like Gianna and I, if we did the full 5 days, would need to be locked in a cage, like away from everyone that we love. Like
I wouldn't make it. I would faint. I just can't. I like have issues already going on anyway from postpartum. I forget if I've even talked about it on this podcast, but I have fainted quite a few times since giving birth to my son.
I'm not worried about you fainting. I'm worried about you physically harming your husband. My husband begged me to eat on day 3. He's like, please just eat something. Please. I beg of you. But what is 12 hours, 16 hours? If you want to do this without Prolon, what would you recommend?
I recommend starting with 12-12. So 12 hours of not eating, which is pretty
You're
easy
sleeping for 8 or
most
6.
people to do. Yeah. So you finish dinner by 7 and you don't eat until after 7 the next day. Pretty doable. Great for like a gut reset. Doesn't really get you into the autophagy, but a great place to start. Also totally safe if you are trying to conceive or you're within that 3 months of trying to conceive, because it doesn't downregulate any of the signaling or sex hormones, putting the body into any sort of stress. Otherwise, it's a little individualized. So some of the things I'm looking at when I'm deciding like whether somebody should be fasting or not, like intermittent fasting, let's say, like doing like a 16-8 or more, like hypothyroid issues, adrenal issues. There are some things where I'm like, or low blood sugar issues, like fasting's probably not the thing for that person. Like if you get hangry, then we want to make sure that we can help your body switch to burning and metabolizing fat better so that you can use that for fuel. Because if your blood sugar is bouncing around, you're creating more stress on your body, and we don't want to do that. So you can go slow and steady. So you can start with a 12-12 and then slowly increase it by an hour or two, in the next week. You also don't need to do it every day. I think diet variation is one of the best things for humans, where you have maybe some intermittent fasting days, you have some feast days, maybe you have a 24-hour fast day. That's really making the body adapt to different situations, and that's building resilience and building that life force in the body. So variation is great. And some women can fast very easily and very successfully with the right support. So go slow and steady, listen to your body, and go from there. And it's not required. Like we've had lots of women rewind their biological clock without doing the fasting component. And for some women, eating breakfast is actually more important because it manages their cortisol and their blood sugar, which then lowers their stress in their body.
It's a lot to think about, and it's a lot to take in. And again, as Gianna said, I don't want people to think like, oh my God, now I have a whole host of other things to research and do and get tested for and poked and prodded and this, that, and the other thing. But again, education.
It's good to be, it's good to be aware of it all. Yeah.
And it's also, I think, good to just look at alternate approaches.
Totally. And I mean, and it's like, it's all about decisions and choices. So you have the information, you have the power of choice. Like, what are you going to choose for yourself? You don't have to choose to fast. You also don't have to choose to do Clockwize, but if you're going to choose to do egg freezing or IVF, it would make sense to choose Clockwize before you go spend $15,000 or $50,000 on those processes.
Right.
So, it's all about, what feels aligned for you and what you're choosing based on what your goals are in your life.
Well, we appreciate everything that you've done in this field, everything you continue to do, everything you will do. And we hope to have you back on when you have another test that you've created yourself. So congratulations on your success and helping so many women out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for this information. It's so great. And I really hope it helps a ton of people, and I certainly think it will. And as Kacie said, thank you for the work that you're putting into this. And first of all, amazing that there's a woman in this space doing this. So yes, cheers to you. Cheers to you.
Thank you,
real quick, where can people find you if they have questions about everything you talked about today? Or again, we'll link to Clockwize and the promo code MOTHERUP in the show notes, but where can people find you?
I'm at Dr. Zagone on Clockwize, and we're at Clockwize Fertility on Instagram. I think, did I just say, I don't know what I just said. I'm at
Clockwize with a Z.
Yeah, Clockwize with a Z. So I'm Dr. Zagone on Instagram, and then we're at Clockwize with a Z Fertility on Instagram because I'm Dr. Z. and clockwise.com. And we do have like an info at email address for other questions about Clockwise.
Awesome. All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.